Hi, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another ICBA cast. I'm Jordan Bateman of the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association, joined as always by
Chris Gardner, president of ICBA.
And we have a lot to talk about today. Chris, we're going to switch up the format. I'm going to get into the boilerplate later in the broadcast today.
Okay.
See how that goes. But first, we got to talk about what everyone in BC politics is talking about. This book, A Matter of Confidence, by Rob Shaw and Richard Zussman, two reporters who covered the election, the lead up to it. Yep. It basically takes you right through from when the HST went down in flames, Gordon Campbell forced to resign, Christy Clark comes in, all the way to John Horgan taking over as premier. Right. And actually, interestingly, one of the final things they talk about is the Site C decision, the flip-flop by John Horgan, where he got the proper idea as to what to do. But first of all, lots of buzz about this book.
There is. I think these are the types of books where, for those who've been involved in politics, as soon as they're published, everyone rushes out. They're looking for what really happened behind the scenes, and everyone has a different version. They hear things. There's rumors, gossip, stories that come out. This is what happened, or he said this, or she said that. But this book sort of puts things on the record, and it's fascinating reading for those who are involved or follow public life closely.
Yeah, it's a bestseller. It's on the Globe and Mail bestseller list. It was such a historic moment. Yeah. And the amazing thing is you start to go through the stories in here and you forget. I mean, you forget that in 2011, Christy Clark becomes leader of the BC Liberals. 2 years later, she has to take them into an election. Those first 2 years were rough. I mean, her caucus, most of her caucus was out to kill her, didn't really like her. She retooled that entire team, somehow held the Free Enterprise Coalition together.
Well, if you recall, she only had one incumbent MLA supporting her in leadership. Mm-hmm. The other MLAs supported either Kevin Falcon or
George
Abbott. And so she didn't have a lot of, there wasn't a lot of confidence in her leadership in the caucus. They were still battling the HST, the hangover from Gordon Campbell's policy that led to his resignation. So as she went into that election, she was able to recruit a number of new candidates, mm-hmm. which was actually quite miraculous, given that nobody thought the BC Liberals were going to win that election. Yep. Adrian Dix was the leader of the NDP, and you remember he actually announced during the campaign who his head of the civil service would be.
Yes, that's right. One of the underrated things I think Christy Clark did was team build in that 2013 yep. election, managing to turn the opinion of people like, Rich Coleman, Mary Polak, Shirley Bond, they all backed yep. other people, turning their opinion, but also adding folks like Peter Fassbender, Amric Verk, recruiting candidates across the province. Absolutely key to that. So it was nice to see her get credit for that in this book. They also talk about John Horgan and how Horgan was desperate to find anyone else except him to lead the NDP. Right. Kind of the reluctant politician. I think that's a bit mythologized. Horgan's a smart guy. Horgan is also an ambitious guy. You don't become a leader if you don't have a little bit of a pull in there. I thought it was interesting, Chris, there's a little bit of an exploration of a possible feud between John Horgan and David Eby. Mm-hmm. They seem to have remedied that now. One wonders, though, given NDP history, whether you want to have people you're feuding with as your attorney general when you're a premier. But
well, I think it's when you are leading a party, it's interesting how when you're in power, how the rumblings within caucus tend to dissipate. Yeah. Because as leader of a party and as premier or prime minister, you can appoint people to positions that are quite important, members of cabinet, other positions, heading committees. And so people are a lot more reluctant to criticize a leader when they're in power. When you're in opposition, there's really not much a leader can do to mollify discontent in a caucus other than by moral suasion. So yeah. I think at the end of the day, Premier Horgan is going to have a fairly smooth ride during this first term.
Yeah. Yeah, and then they cover the 2017 election, obviously, and some of the moments in it where the leaders really reinforce the public image, a negative public image of themselves. For example, that first debate where Clark touches Horgan on the sleeve and Horgan recoils, physically like, oh, don't touch me, and makes that really kind of creepy, weird comment about, I'll just sit here and watch you. I know you like that. It actually talks about him going into the NDP war room after that debate, head hanging, saying, I screwed up, because he reinforced that Hulk Horgan image, right? Yeah. Conversely, Christy Clark had a bit of a reputation for being out of touch with the common person, and that lady Linda shows up on the island one day during a campaign stop, and Christy Clark, considered maybe one of the most gifted retail campaigners in the history of the province, like at a level of the Bill Vander Zalm, those kind of charismatic one-on-one people, just completely bungles this, is dismissive and almost rude to this woman, and then floats a conspiracy theory after that she was an NDP plant. This idea that you cannot reinforce the negative stereotypes that the other party is trying to put out about you.
Yeah, and I think what was interesting in that episode with the Premier and that voter in the grocery store is that the Premier was mic'd up during that interaction, that exchange, and that's unusual. Generally, you're only going to mic up your leader when you're doing speeches, you're being scrummed by the media, and then after that, everything shuts down.
Yeah.
But because she was mic'd up, the media caught the feed, caught the exchange, and then that contributed to becoming a very significant issue that they had to deal with for a number of days and weeks in that campaign.
Yeah, no, exactly. Also talks about some of the bold decisions the NDP made, and one thing I think that the Trudeau victory in the Horgan, I guess it wasn't really a victory because he finished second, but Horgan is the Premier, so I guess he won. One thing that we've learned from those platforms is half measures don't cut through the clutter that's necessary to cut through to voters.
Yeah.
Christy Clark comes out and says we're going to cap tolls on the Port Mann Bridge and Golden Ears at $500. The NDP in the book, it's clear they had the same promise plan, either $500 or $750. But they immediately threw that out. If she's going at $500, we're going to get rid of them altogether. And that really was a key turning point inside the NDP, according to the book. It showed that they were basically willing to do whatever it took to win. It reversed, what the urbanists in the NDP would consider good public policy. But it was clear that Bob Dewar wanted to win this election and was going to do what it takes to do it.
Yeah, I think that the tolls is an interesting example of a policy decision that was made, and that was made under the Gordon Campbell era when the Port Mann Bridge was under construction. They were going to come out with a tolling policy, and the policy was we will only toll bridges or highways where there's in cases where there's an alternative route that would be free, untolled. Yeah. And the challenge is that ended up. It sounds great, and it sounds.
It was a way to stop them from having to toll sea to sky.
Exactly, and it was also for conservatives. The user pay model is often trotted out as well. That's the fairest way. If you use the service, then you pay for it. The challenge is nothing else was ever told.
No.
So it was inherently unfair.
Yeah.
And but it was a hill to die on for a lot of people in the BC Liberal Party, and that ended up costing them fairly significantly in this election.
Yeah, a user pay model, I'd argue 51 cents a litre in gas taxes is about as user pay as you can get. So it was really double hitting those folks. It talks about a story that we'd heard right after the negotiations between the NDP and Greens proved fruitful and the supply and confidence agreement was signed. We had heard a rumor in BC Liberal land that Sonia Furstenau, one-third of the Green caucus, was so repulsed at the idea of supporting Christy Clark that she actually physically threw up in one of these meetings. Sure enough, Zussman and Shaw get to the bottom of that story. It's true. She did leave a meeting, went out into the lobby, and threw up into a waste paper basket. She claims it was sushi poisoning.
Right.
But it's very clear that isn't it was very much about the idea of supporting the BC Liberals, and really that tied Andrew Weaver's hands. I mean, how could he negotiate with the Liberals if one-third of his caucus probably would have crossed the floor to the NDP?
Well, it's clear that there never was a deal to be had between the BC Liberals and the Green Party. It was never on the table.
Yeah, and then finally, a great story about Darryl Plecas, Mike Farnworth having worked him all summer long to cross the floor, become an independent, says the speaker. And sure enough, that's what he did. Plecas, who helped put the knife in Christy Clark at their caucus meeting, although Clark claims that she was planning to leave all along, and then still betraying the Liberals. You can see why that wound will take a long time to heal. And I can tell you that in his riding in Abbotsford, I live in Langley next door, I hear lots of rumblings in Abbotsford that people are just counting down to a recall because they feel like they were promised one thing by Mr. Plecas, Speaker Plecas, and were given another. So yeah, A Matter of Confidence, wherever fine books are sold, worth the read if you're a political junkie at all. And why the heck else would you be listening to this this podcast? Go out and get it. Zussman and Shaw have done a fabulous job. All right. ICBA, the Independent Contractors and Business Association, for 42 years, we've been the voice of BC's construction and responsible resource development industries, a relentless and passionate advocate for free enterprise. 250,000 people work in construction in BC. It's contributing almost 9% of the BC economy. Let's talk about a group that has done some polling through Main Street Research, the Progressive Contractors Association, an Alberta-based group, but they've done some polling around British Columbians' attitudes on project labor agreements. So why don't you give us sort of the thumbnail sketch of what a PLA is?
So this group, PCA, Progressive Contractors Association, based in Alberta, they represent construction companies that have collective agreements with what they would call progressive unions and non-building trades unions. They did a poll, and the poll asked them a couple things. One was questions on the secret ballot for union certification, and the other is on project labor agreements, or what the NDP are now calling community benefit agreements.
Yeah, which is a masterclass in spin.
That's right. So basically what these agreements entail is that if you're going to undertake a publicly funded construction project, a bridge, a road, or a hospital, that project is governed by one agreement, and that agreement sets out the working conditions for the project, the wage rates, the flexibility in terms of overtime and working on weekends, and all of the issues that would govern the working relationship between the construction workers working on that project and the companies that employ them.
Absolutely. So 3 highlights that we want to talk about, 3 slides we have here. They asked British Columbians, do you believe that affiliation with certain unions should be a requirement for companies and workers who want to build taxpayer-funded infrastructure in BC? This is the NDP's payoff to the building trades unions who have plowed millions and millions of dollars into their campaigns over the years. They essentially want everyone to be forced to join the union if they're going to work on a school or a hospital or a road. Instead of trying to get the best bid possible, they want to get the union bid possible. Anyways, 59% of British Columbians say, no, you shouldn't have to join a union in order to build taxpayer-funded infrastructure. 41%, mainly union households, say you do. Second one, or next slide we wanted to highlight. This had to do with, again, joining unions in order to get PLAs, tilting the playing field. And it's a basic question about PLAs in general, project labor agreements. Would PLAs be in the best interests of all British Columbians? 77% of British Columbians said no. Hard to get 77% of people to agree on anything in this province, but 77% of us agree that sweetheart deals for unions does not make sense. And then one more, they had a conversation about the Island Highway model, which is often touted as a great NDP success story from the 1990s. It actually drove up construction costs by 30 or 40%. The studies have shown over and over again that when you limit the playing field to certain companies, union companies, that you actually end up paying more for those services. It makes sense. Yep. If you're restricting it to 15% of the companies that can bid on work, those 15% are going to ratchet up their costs. They asked if people thought there was a risk to taxpayers for that PLAs would drive up costs, and 68% said yes. So yeah, it seems like the public are on side with us here. They want fairness in bidding.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things here. Now, why is this important? It sounds like a fairly...
It's a community benefit agreement. As John Horgan says, who could be against community benefits?
Exactly. So here's what it means. John Horgan, the Premier of the province, goes out about a month ago, meets with a whole bunch of building trades union organizers, and says to them that the Patella Bridge, which they've committed to build, a $1.3 billion project, is going to be built by union-only construction companies. So first of all, that's fundamentally unfair. I think British Columbians believe that if we're going to take taxpayers' dollars and build infrastructure, and we want to do that, that companies, whether they're union or non-union, should have a right to bid on that work, and the company that can provide the best value and do the work safely and meet the schedule should win the work. And so that's the first point. The second point is the building trades construction portion, the percentage of construction workers who are members of building trades unions is about 13 to 15% in this province. So to your point, Jordan, what the Premier is basically saying is we're going to direct the $1.3 billion to 15% of the workforce.
Yeah.
Again, that's unfair.
Yeah.
There's no balance in that. Taxpayers are going to lose out because they're going to pay higher costs for that construction project. And it's not fair to the other 85% of the workforce. That's either part of a progressive union, a non-building trades union, or a non-union completely. So it doesn't make any sense. It's not fair. And that's not how taxpayers' dollars should be spent.
Yeah, it's favoritism. It really is tilting the playing field. And just think about it, anything in your life. You go out there, and if you could only talk to 15% of the market who offers that service or good, imagine what the cost of that service or good would be increased. It's 1970s dogma, and it really is about trying to save these last few building trades unions. It's a last gasp effort to make them relevant again. But guess what? Times have changed. Construction has changed. The only people who are going to be hurt here are taxpayers. Yeah. All right, let's talk about Greg Moore, Metro Vancouver. This, Chris, you may have to pardon me. I'm going to have to rant at some point here. Metro Vancouver, in secret, talked about raises for themselves, for their board members. That's made up of an appointee or two from every single council across the Metro Vancouver Regional District. Late on a Friday afternoon, appended to the agenda late so the media didn't know. They decided to give themselves an $1,100 a year severance payment. So for every year you serve on Metro Vancouver, you get $1,100 when you came off the board. And they also talked about or passed a motion to increase their pay by 11%. The federal government has phased out a tax credit that municipal politicians used to get in lieu of expenses. You would get 1/3 of your income tax-free. The problem was municipal politicians started claiming expenses on top of that 1/3 tax-free, so they got rid of that altogether. And these guys raised their pay so that they didn't have to harm their take-home check. Chris, the last time anyone raised your taxes, did they also give you a raise to cover off the tax increase, or did you have to find the money yourself?
This is it's completely outrageous, and this is why people become so cynical about people in public office, because effectively at every turn. They sit back once every 3 or 4 years and have a meeting in secret and decide how much to pay themselves. And obviously, it never goes down; it always goes up. Inherent conflict of interest. The sense that of public service has been lost on most elected officials. It's about them. It's about enriching themselves, and to attend committee meetings. Like, imagine that this isn't even their job. Serving on Metro Vancouver is part-time. It comes with, as a responsibility, it's attached to whether you're a councillor in Langley or
It's a choice to
Surrey.
put your name forward.
That's right.
Yeah.
So you go on and you serve on this committee, and you get paid meeting fees. And then somehow there's a severance attached to that if you stop serving after 3 years or 5 years or whatever. It's completely ridiculous. And another community that a few years ago, I think back in 2008, introduced severance for local councillors was Surrey.
Yeah.
So if you're serving on Surrey City Council and you decide not to run again or you lose election, you get a severance payment. It's completely ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. So a few things here. First of all, no one holds a gun to any of these people's heads to run for office. You do that by choice. You put your name out there. I was a municipal politician for 2 terms. I get it. But no one's putting a gun to your head to do it.
Did you get a severance payment?
I did not get a severance payment when I left.
You should have voted yourself.
I know, I should have. Well, here's the thing. So I did vote once to raise salaries for municipal politicians, but we voted for the next council coming in. Right. Because, you run for office, you know the deal.
Right.
You know the deal. Like, that's the first part. The second part is, when you actually get elected to council, no one forces you to sit on a Metro Vancouver committee. Right. And in fact, the chair of Metro Vancouver has inordinate power to appoint whoever they want from across all the different councils to these different committees. And not surprisingly, Greg Moore, the mayor of Port Coquitlam, who's been the chair of Metro Vancouver for a long time and was defeated in the TransLink referendum, by the way, he came out and put 2/3 or 3/4 of his Port Coquitlam councillors on. And lo and behold, no Port Coquitlam councillor ever runs against Greg Moore for re-election. So convenient, isn't that? So you get 1 or 2 from Langley, you get 6 Port Coquitlam representatives on these different committees. But that's a whole other story. Greg Moore defends this Metro Vancouver retro pay plan when the crap hits the fan, goes to Australia on a junket to look at a transit system in Brisbane, Australia. The former head of Brisbane Transit works for TransLink. There is no one who's going to know more about that system than her, sitting in TransLink headquarters. But we send Greg Moore, who's not running for re-election in October. This is my Greg Moore rant, by the way, folks. He goes to Brisbane from Australia. He has to tamp out the fire after, defending the retro pay plan, he is now admitting his mistake on the retro pay plan. They're going to bring it back for reconsideration. Let me debunk a couple of things here. There is no competitive market for salaries for politicians. It is not like Greg Moore, as the chair of GVRD, is going to move to the Capital Regional District to take a job as chairman of the Capital Regional District Board because they pay more or because they have a severance. That doesn't happen. It is a fake market, and you cannot apply market rates to this. So there is no competitive market for Metro Vancouver directors. If you think there is Metro Vancouver directors, I challenge you to go run in the Thompson Okanagan for a seat there. You won't get elected. Don't worry about it. Your problem will be solved. Second of all, politicians, I think we would agree. Some are overpaid. Some are underpaid. But that is all in the eye of the beholder. Who I think is serving on, for example, Langley Township Council where I live. I think some are overpaid and I think some are underpaid. That is completely on my opinion on it, my perception. But you can't pay them based on merit.
And in that situation, the voters of Langley can go to the ballot box and decide to
turf out the ones.
Yeah, that's exactly. The challenge with Metro Vancouver, there's no accountability. A lot of this gets lost in the shuffle. And in the fall of this year, there's going to be a municipal election again. And you have an opportunity to cast your vote and vote against the folks who decided to take this to support this cash grab.
But here's the thing, Chris. They didn't record who voted. And it was a show of hands. They didn't record the vote.
And so what will happen this election, everyone will talk about issues in Coquitlam and Langley and Surrey and Vancouver. Everyone will forget this. There's no accountability at Metro Van. But what I would do if I were a voter is I would vote against every single one of those directors in my community who served on that board, because we all know what happened. I bet you every single one of them voted for that.
It looked like all but 4 or 5 of them.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then finally, my last part of my rant, Calgary Mayor Rod Sykes, former Calgary Mayor, he wrote a book called Take Back City Hall. And his argument was that increasing political compensation at the City Hall level has actually led to less qualified people running for office, because it's become about professional politicians, not about civic duty. And I know that flies in the face of what Greg Moore is saying, but Mayor Moore is about to hit the open employment market because he is not running for re-election. I think he's in for quite a eye-opening experience about what the real world is like. So that ends my Metro Vancouver rant.
And the challenge locally is that incumbency is very powerful. Name recognition is very powerful because voter turnout in local elections is quite low, roughly around 30%.
Yeah, powered by the unions.
And so you end up in a situation where, we know that, Ed Smith, and I hear Ed's name all the time, and I go into the ballot box, it seems like a good guy, click, and you vote for him. Yeah. That is a significant challenge. And how many times do you get in conversations where people say, that candidate is running again because they have nothing else to do? And that is the unfortunate reality. And so as a result, leadership at City Hall is often lacking, and you can see it in terms of the approval process for projects. It takes as long to get a project approved as to build it. You get 20 people coming out to a public hearing, and all the councillors afraid of losing their job will turtle and reverse a decision that they should have made for the good of the community.
Or worse, won't make a decision, defer it on and on and on, stringing the developer along and costing them a ridiculous amount of money. Yeah.
But there are good people in government.
There are good people in government. Lots of mayors not running for re-election. Most of them who I'm happy to see go out the door. I'm looking at you, Gregor Robertson and Greg Moore. Thank you for your service. But don't take my $1,100 a year.
And don't take a severance payment.
That's right. Exactly. All right. Let's do a quick round the horn on Get to Yes projects. Chris, I'm going to name some Get to Yes projects. You give me the brief update on where they are. Okay. First of all, some good news on Get to Yes. In Vancouver, of all places, Fortis BC, they're undertaking a $500 million natural gas pipeline improvement in Vancouver over the summer. This from a municipality that tried to ban natural gas a mere year ago. Seems like Vancouver has finally woken up to the importance of this infrastructure.
Yeah, listen, all throughout the Lower Mainland, we're using natural gas in buildings, in homes, and this is important infrastructure. It's a pipeline. We're building it right in the middle of Metro Vancouver. People should not be scared about this kind of infrastructure. It's important. It's vital to our economy. It's great to see this project by Fortis going forward.
It's also a reminder, there are pipelines running under your house right now. They're running down your street. They're running next door to you. They are among you at all times. And guess what? They usually work great. we can actually coexist with pipelines because we have been for generations now. All right, Kinder Morgan, the protests continue. Stuart Phillip, the chief, is going to come down and get arrested this weekend, he promises. Justin Trudeau is in town. Just saw a funny YouTube video of him getting nearly smacked in the face by the tail of an inflated killer whale orca prop at a protest rally. Kinder Morgan, where are we at?
Kinder Morgan is mired in government uncertainty. At this point, the federal government needs to press forward and basically sit down with British Columbia and say the project's going to be built. And British Columbia needs to accept the fact that Kinder Morgan went through an extremely lengthy process. They followed all the rules. There's been 195 conditions attached to this project. It's a $7.4 billion investment in our economy. Let's get those shovels in the ground.
Absolutely. LNG Canada, it sounds like there's more attention being paid to the duties on the imported steel.
Yeah, I think for LNG Canada, a $40 billion investment in our economy, and Wood Fibre LNG in Squamish, $1.6 billion project. Both those LNG projects, I think, are going to go this year. I think the federal government looks like they're going to provide the duties, the remission on duties and tariffs for imported steel. Great news. Great news for our energy economy. Great news for British Columbia. Great news for Canada. The LNG Canada project will be the largest private sector investment ever in the history of this country.
Yeah, and to be clear, Canada does not have the physical capability of manufacturing these parts. Whenever you put this up on our social media, there's some people out there saying, we should build them in Canada. Yeah, we agree. We'd love to build them in Canada. There is no metal plant that can handle it. These are incredibly complicated, huge pieces that are done. They have to come in from offshore, so we just have to deal with that. The federal government, provincial government, municipal government all seem to finally be at the table with money or re-announcing money for the TransLink projects.
Yep.
Light rail in Surrey, a subway to Arbutus.
That's great.
They keep re-announcing the money, but nothing ever gets done.
I know. We need that. We need
get a shovel in the ground, people.
Let's build something. There hasn't been a SkyTrain station built in Surrey since 1993. Yeah. And but
Surrey hasn't grown much over the last 35 years, has it, Chris?
No, it's just the second largest city in the province, or the fastest growing in the country, and we have not expanded public transit there in terms of SkyTrain or LRT, which is something that the city has been fighting for a number of years. Let's get on with these projects.
All right, and one last one. Where are you, Massey Tunnel?
Under this government, I don't think Massey Tunnel is anywhere. And that's unfortunate. It's one of the biggest bottlenecks in the country. And it doesn't make sense. It's a safety hazard. It's 60 some odd years old. And pretty soon we tend to kick the can down the road on municipal infrastructure in this country, and certainly in British Columbia. Witness the Patella Bridge, 83 years old. We're finally now have made the commitment to build it. Massey Tunnel is not too far behind. We've got to get a plan around replacing the Massey Tunnel.
And a shout out to Ian Patton, MLA for Delta South? North.
South.
Delta South. Former Delta City Councillor. He has been incredible on this issue. I've got to say, of all of the opposition members, the BC Liberal members, this guy seems to have figured it out the quickest. Constant stuff on social media, in the press about making the case for a Massey replacement. And I noticed as well on the payroll tax, came out this week with groups that you would not expect to take a political position, groups like the Delta Gymnastics Foundation, which has to find $30,000 in their budget for the payroll tax, Big Sisters, Big Brothers, groups like that he's managed to have their stories come to the fore. So Ian Patton, keep up the good work, and hopefully you're being held up by your leader as a model to other opposition MLAs, because we need to get that out. All right, well, folks, that's it for us. Thanks for listening to the ICBA cast. We'll be back next week. Should we mention Outlook Forum? Do you want to?
Well, we've got ticket sales are going very well. Former Premier of Saskatchewan, Brad Walz, coming in town for breakfast on May 16th. He'll be joined by Chris Wallace, the only journalist to host NBC's Meet the Press and Fox News Sunday. He moderated the third presidential debate, and by far that was the best debate.
It was the greatest debate, the best debate ever.
It's going to be a great breakfast.
Huge.
If you haven't got your tickets, it will be a stormy affair.
No, Stormy Daniels. Yeah, by the way, folks, do not Google Stormy Daniels. Just go to CNN.com. They have it covered for you. All right. ICBA.ca, at ICBABC on Twitter, Facebook.com/the ICBA. We will see you again.
Have a good
week.
weekend.